Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing a chatty discussion video where I'm going to give you 5 tips to read more non-fiction. So it's no secret on the channel, I'm a huge non-fiction reader, but I haven't always been that, and it's definitely been in more literally recently in the kind of past 6 months or so that I've been dramatically increasing my non-fiction reading. And I know that non-fiction is something that a lot of people do find intimidating, so I wanted to give some tips as somebody who regularly reads non-fiction now. It makes up somewhere between 35 to 40% of my reading at the moment. I wanted to give some tips on how to get into non-fiction if you are intimidated by it. So my first tip is basically to get frivolous, and by this what I mean is there is a tendency to consider non-fiction to be quite a serious thing, a book that is worth reading because it does something, it improves you in some way, compared to the more light-hearted, fun, hobby style of fiction. And I think that this is completely wrong, and I think plenty of regular non-fiction readers would totally agree with me on this one. So rather than necessarily leaning towards some of the more social justice-y, dense, intense ways of the world style books out there, it's perfectly okay to pick up a non-fiction that is about something ultimately quite frivolous. If you're into board games, pick up a history board game book. If you're into medical dramas, pick up a medicine book. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that is actually a lot more light-hearted and fun than you would necessarily think. So definitely check out some of the more light-hearted stuff and don't worry about whether it's serious enough to count as non-fiction. My second tip would be to accept that you don't have to remember everything that you're reading, and don't feel pressured that it's a waste of time if you aren't remembering everything you're reading. By this I mean, like, you're not in school anymore, or if you are in school, the book that you're picking up is not necessarily something you're going to be tested on, so don't worry as much about like whether you're retaining everything, fully understanding everything. Like, you don't need to treat non-fiction as if it's a big test. If I look at some of the non-fiction that I read, honestly, if I can walk away from a non-fiction book with a handful of cool new facts, or even just a general sense of a topic, then I consider it a massive win. There are probably non-fictions out there that, like, I know I can't really remember much about them, in the same way that there are fiction out there that I can't remember much about. If you're a regular reader and you think about the sheer number of books that you've read over your life, can you really remember all of them? Can you remember all the plots in detail? Can you remember all the character names? I suck at character names. And given that, I don't see why it'd be any different when we're talking about people who are real compared to fictional. So if you can't remember the dates and names of a history book, or you can't remember all the particular facts of a non-fiction book, and if you're not an expert who can't do a TED talk immediately after finishing a book, that's totally okay. It's going to take a while, but these things will start to slowly connect up as you read more and more into a different topic. And if you're like me and bounce around all over the place, hey, it may never connect up, but that's still fine. As long as you enjoyed the reading process and got something from it as like an enjoyable experience, who cares? Tip number 3 is to look at other resources when thinking about what non-fiction to pick up. So non-fiction is as broad, if not broader, than fiction, and there are so many different subtopics out there and subgenres out there that it can be a little bit overwhelming for looking where to start. But it also means, I personally think, that there definitely is a non-fiction genre for you if you're not a non-fiction reader. You just haven't found it yet. So rather than necessarily jumping in with lots of like book recommendation videos or anything like that, I'd actually recommend trying out whatever topic it is that you're interested in from other resources. So have a think back to your school days. Were there any topics that you were really interested back then that you'd like to read more about? Maybe check out some podcasts, some documentaries, some mini-series on YouTube. There's tons of information out there. Hell, skim read a few Wikipedia pages. But I think it's worth checking before you commit to a 350-page book. Am I actually interested in this topic enough to read a 350-page book on it, or do I just want to listen to a 20-minute podcast? It can be a great way of sparking new interest, but also checking whether you do want to go through that or not. Because if your first few books aren't very enjoyable, you're probably not going to continue. Although that's probably like a mini hint in this, and like mini tip, is actually your first few non-fiction books, like with any new genre that you get into, they're not all going to be like 5 stars. They're not all going to be heavy hitters. You're going to get some duds in there, you're going to get some DNFs. That's okay. It's no different to trying to pick up any new genre. You're learning what tropes you enjoy, you're learning what styles you enjoy, and it's completely fine to not be able to like pick that up immediately. But don't write off an entire genre just because you happen to pick up a couple of bad ones in a row. Actual tip number 4 is check the length of the non-fiction book that you're picking up. And by that what I mean is non-fiction has a little thing that no fiction really ever has, which is a combination of a bibliography, appendix, notes, indices, whatever you want to call them, an index section, basically a chunk of crap at the back of the book that you're not actually going to read. But this means that books that are quite long and quite intimidating to look at often aren't anywhere near actually as long as they appear to be. So when you're thinking about picking up a non-fiction, this probably applies more when you're actually physically in a bookstore browsing bookshelves that eventually we will get to go do again at some point in our lives. It's a good idea to just have a skim to the back, because honestly anywhere from a quarter to a third of a non-fiction book might be made up of an index and notes forms, but that's completely cool because it means that it's nowhere near as intimidating as it originally looked. Also, those are a great source for finding out where else to go next when you're done with the book. And my final tip is to change your expectations going into it. You are dealing with something that is looking at the factual world, which means depending on the style of non-fiction that you're picking up, you're going to have to change your expectations for what is considered like a satisfying read. For example, if you read a lot of fiction and then you move into the memoir, biography or autobiography range, real life doesn't follow a lovely narrative arc, and it doesn't always come with the most satisfying endings. Quite a few of the biographies and memoirs that I've read in my life kind of peter away and don't have like a big lovely tying up scene at the end, because that's not what you get from life. Sometimes your favourite character can end up dying quite early on, because again, we don't get a say over which characters get to stay and which characters get to go in our own lives. There isn't like an omniscient narrator who is pulling the strings and making things flow in the way that you want them to flow, because again, it's in the factual world, so you do have to slightly adjust what it's going to be like reading it. Also on that note, if you're going for non-fiction that is a little bit more information heavy, not about a memoir but about a particular topic, the narrative structure isn't going to be there in the same way. You're not going to have a plot necessarily. This doesn't mean that there isn't going to be some kind of overarching sort of arc story vibe to it or some kind of narrative flow, but in terms of like really major act 1, 2 and 3 stuff, it's going to be missing because that's not what the book is doing. So it's important when you're coming to non-fiction to not make direct comparisons to fiction and to what you're looking for or you enjoy in that. Characters are different because they're real. Storylines are different because they're real. Sometimes life is weirder than fiction, but also sometimes it's distinctly less satisfying than fiction. But that's okay, so long as you kind of accept that going in. So those are 5 tips from me, nice and quickly, just about how to get into non-fiction and read a little bit more. Do let me know in the comments down below if you're a new non-fiction reader or if you're interested in getting into non-fiction and have no idea where to start. If you're looking for a particular non-fiction recommendation on a completely obscure topic, give me a shout. I read really random crap. I probably have a book for you, so do let me know. Also, if you're trying to find more non-fiction on BookTube, there is actually a non-fiction on BookTube tag, which was created by the wonderful Olive at Book Olive, who is probably considered the unofficial queen of non-fiction here on BookTube, so please do check out her channel and that tag as a great way of finding out about more non-fiction readers. Like with my classics video, I'm going to link a ton of people down below who read a lot of non-fiction, so again, if you're looking for more creators, please do check everybody out down there. And if you're somebody who is a creator of non-fiction and like a regular non-fiction reader on YouTube, please again comment down below so people can find you. Have a wonderful reading week and I'll chat to you soon. Bye!